I'd like to introduce our next speaker, friends, Mr. Suleman Jhavary. Mr. Jhavary is a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers Durban office. He's a chartered accountant, South Africa, and a certified information systems auditor. He has gained extensive experience over the last 17 years in external audit, internal audit, finance, IT, controls, business processes, supply chain management, and IT-related projects. He specializes in assurance, control design, review and implementation, and general advisory services for PricewaterhouseCoopers clients. He also has extensive experience in conducting business process and IT reviews. He is involved in managing business process re-engineering projects and reviews, especially within the supply chain management environment. Suleman has also been involved in assisting clients assessing their business against global best practice in terms of their financial, process, people, and information technology areas. Suleman is a KZN PwC leader for strategy and operations, which includes supply chain management and lean operations. And lean operations includes the Six Sigma business process improvement for organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Jhavary to the podium. A round of applause, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I'll actually apologize up front. My presentation is not as exciting as the one you've seen just now, so unfortunately it's more academic, but let's give it a shot and see how it goes. Okay, so I've been asked to talk to you about supply chain management, and I guess what I decided to do was just include a little bit more on supply chain. I also introduced this concept of reducing cost in there today. So I'll take you through a bit of that, and then I just want to share with you some of the experiences we've had in the higher educational institution and some of the common challenges affecting supply chain management. And hopefully we'll end with a couple of questions at the end. So just quickly to get started, just in terms of supply chain management, I think many a time we need to understand and reflect what actually is supply chain management. And I'd like to start this off by generally looking at supply chain management and understanding the true definition. And it's very interesting if you look at it. It talks about having the right goods at the right price, at the right time, at the right place, and at the right cost. And that's a very important statement if you look at it. And I guess if you get it right, it fundamentally contributes to all aspects of an organization. And I'm sure you won't disagree with that. So supply chain management or procurement contributes at every level. And I think the studies we're showing pretty much is that it contributes to every aspect. But interestingly enough, having said that, and those of some of the people I've worked with and some are probably in the audience, supply chain management has to spend a lot of time listening. So they need to listen to their users, and I define users as those individuals that use the services of supply chain management or procurement. And listening is a very important skill. Sometimes we don't do it that well. Most of you have spouses or partners, and you probably understand what I'm talking about. They say a lot of stuff, but do we actually listen? I know I'm guilty of that. Sometimes I switch off and say yes to things, and later on I realize, oh my God, I said yes to that. But I mean, we all go through that. But I guess the important thing is just to reflect on that. So I'm going to show you a small clip. If you don't take anything away from it professionally, I'm sure you'll get something from it personally.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail out.
See, you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
So, yeah, well, hopefully you'll take something away from that. But I guess it's about that, right? Listening. And I think that's quite key for all of us. So I want to share some of the trends with you. We've done a lot of work locally and globally. Some of it is not specific to your industry. But it's interesting because I guess sometimes we take a lot of lessons that we learn from emerged markets. And this is quite interesting in terms of the trends we're finding. Just some of the key trends we're finding is building capacity. I mean, you probably say to me, that's pretty obvious. But if you look at the history of procurement, especially in this country and where it's come from, it's pretty much a buying function. I don't know if you agree with that, but it's pretty much a buying function. And this resonates with us. But what we're finding is it's not about that technical skill only. It's about the softer skills. It's about how you treat people, how you deal with your suppliers, and how do you build relationships. And that's becoming quite vital in terms of how we ensure the success of procurement. Better supplier management. Sorry, the text is quite small, but you can ignore it. I'll go through it with you. So better supplier management, the concept or the studies are showing that traditional benefits that are attained from tender processes, you know, making sure we go out and we tender and we get the right price, etc., will be outweighed by building long-term sustainable relationship with suppliers. But of course, that doesn't mean compromising fair, equitable, and transparent procurement, but it's about building a relationship of trust with your suppliers. That's what we're finding globally. Then we talk about measuring realized savings. You probably understand that measuring savings is very difficult. Savings in various spheres becomes very theoretical. And you can only actually measure them once they go through your system. But then too, it's a very theoretical exercise. And what we're finding is that the core concept of measuring savings comes from what we talk about catalog management. And I'll touch on that when we go into contract management. It's about establishing your catalogs, your various categories into catalogs, and then making sure that you manage savings within them. Procurement technology is becoming a big buzzword, and we all know about, you know, e-sourcing and e-procurement, and I'll touch on that in a second. But what we're finding is that organizations are looking for technology that manage your procurement from sourcing, in other words, identifying the sourcing, from supply, and then looking at actual contract management, and finally, supplier management. So managing the entire life cycle. And what you will see as we progress into the future, that technologies will develop a lot more robust in that areas. So your conventional procurement, data interchange, etc., will have its place, but it's about the entire life cycle. And then managed services. What we're finding globally is, and I guess, again, I'm just sharing this with you, but you can take the learnings into your own organizations. You get a lot of outsourced service providers that are now offering what they're calling managed procurement services. So they're taking the traditional, you know, buyers or strategic sources, strategic managers, they're taking them. Those individuals are really good from buying and really economically understand economics, they understand financial impact. They're taking them and they're coupling them with individuals that have fine-tuned analysis skills and that are very process-driven. And if you combine those skills, you can deliver the same product more effectively and efficiently. So that's what companies are focusing on globally. So I think that's quite interesting from a global trend. And maybe you can reflect on that for a second. E-procurement. we've all heard this buzzword of e-procurement, and I guess, you may wonder, how does this work? Is it coming? Government's been talking about centralizing procurement. I guess PERCO is one of those options, but let me share something with you. You can read the details on the slide. Let me share an example with you that I experienced when I was up in the UK. The NHI, their healthcare system embarked on an e-procurement system. So what they did was, they went out, developed a platform. They invited service providers to register on this platform. When they registered, of course, they had to go through the pre-checks, the criteria, and if you take our example, tax compliant, BE certificates, etc. They then subscribed and agreed to terms and conditions for delivering that service. I guess it's more easy if I take a commodity, for delivering a pen. So they subscribed and they agreed to those terms and conditions. Once they did, the platform opened up to those service providers, fully transparent, and each one could bid for the work. So let me give you an example. One bid, for example, £5 for the pen. That was fully transparent. The next service provider could go in and bid £4.95 for that same pen. And so the bid process continued. Fully transparent, fully online. Anybody could go in and observe what was happening. The bid closed, and they got the cheapest price. So of course, there are control mechanisms around that you need to implement. But that's the future of e-procurement. It's easier with a commodity, I agree. It's a little bit difficult with the service, not impossible, but it is possible. If you take that particular instance, I think they saved a couple of £100 million with that process. They were establishing various healthcare facilities, implementing various upgrades and revitalization programs, and they saved a fortune of money. So it's interesting. So the concept of e-procurement is not about data interchange. In other words, having your orders automatically, trigger off to your supplier. It's more than that, and that's what the trends are showing. Okay, what I do want to share with you quickly now is PwC runs what we refer to as a global crime survey. It's a survey that we run across the world. I've extracted data specifically for South Africa. So we had basically 134 respondents across 17 industries, which includes the higher education sector, the public sector. Interestingly enough, we surveyed them and asked them, so in the last 24 months, what types of fraud have you experienced? And if you look at it, if I can point with this, can you see it? Oh no, you can't see that. Procurement fraud was 69% of the respondents experienced some type of procurement fraud in the last 24 months. Globally, that was 29%. So procurement fraud is quite rife in our country. But we took it a bit further and we said, okay, tell us a little bit more. Within procurement, what was the fraud you experienced specifically? And you will see, if you can read that, the biggest element coming up was vendor selection. Yeah, the other ones are there. I mean, if you take the payment process, you take the bid process, but vendor selection came up with the biggest. Just reflect on that. Reflect on relationships that suppliers have with individuals in institutes. Are we getting the right suppliers? Are they delivering on time? Coming back to my definition. Interesting. This is not from us. This is from 134 respondents across 17 industries in South Africa. So that's effectively what we talk about when we look at the trends that are happening. So quite clearly there's a move for certain things in the industry. Okay, so the other element I thought quite interestingly I want to talk about today is reducing costs. And I guess this has been something that's been fore of mind for me for quite a while. What does it mean when we talk about reducing costs specifically, especially in your industry? I mean, many people would ask you, why now? Why are we talking about reducing costs now? And I guess it's quite clear, right? All I have to say is hashtag fees must fall. And you'll understand that there's huge pressure coming on you. I did some research for another one of my clients, and I guess for your industry, you'll understand that government is expecting you to increase your enrollment from a 950,000 to 1.6 million by 2030. That's expected of you, right? Besides that, now you've got to overlay the fact that, one, you're getting a 0% increase in fees. There's huge pressure coming. In fact, I I understand initially the concept was there's a deficit next year of 5 billion rand at a zero base. This morning I read the Business Times and it says, actually the deficit is 19.1 billion rand just to keep your fees at zero. And yes, government's going to fund that. They have to fund it. So they're going to look for mechanisms, whether it's, a graduation tax, yes, graduation tax, whether it's looking at the private sector, and increasing the levies, whatever those mechanisms are. There may be a wealth tax that will be introduced. There's various mechanisms, but it can't raise, the fiscal can't raise 19 billion rand. It's going to be incumbent upon you to look for ways of saving your costs. That is a given. I mean, I prepared this a while ago, but it's becoming more and more relevant. I took 2 institutes, just by way of example, and I said to myself, let me understand from these 2 institutes, and deliberately I took 2013. So some of you who understand your financial statements won't recognize this, so hopefully we'll forget them. And I haven't named the universities as well. And I said, let me look at them and understand from the perspective of what is your spend in 3 categories. Personnel costs, your other expenditures, which is probably your third-party spend or your goods and services, and building and fixed structures. Just 3 components. And you're spending about 8 billion in this one institute, and the other one is spending 6.9 billion. And if I had to say to you, you need to save 10%, you're probably going to tell me you're crazy. You can't do that. You can't do that in a year. You can't do that in the next 6 months or 12 or 18. And you probably are right. There's fundamental aspects that are put in place that are going to take a little while to unwind. But if I had to say to you, just save 1%, just 1%, I'm sure you can achieve that. And the impact of that is tremendous. I mean, if you look at that, it's going to give this institute 88 and another 69 million. That's about 157 odd million rand just across 2 institutes. And that's at 1%. So this is coming. It's going to be incumbent upon you to really reflect on this. So what's our view? What's my view on cost reduction? There's many things you can do. I guess you can go ahead and you can do without. The age-old thing. As soon as we're going to cost reduction, no more biscuits at meetings. Have any of you had that? Okay. No more biscuits. We're only going to have tea and that's it, or coffee. And no more Jacobs, it's going to be something else. Frisco, yeah. So we've all been through that. And yeah, that is one of the mechanisms. And what we found is that, and I'll give you a couple of examples. We've worked with companies. I've done a lot of those exercises with public and private companies. And you'll save between 5 and 10%. You will save between 5 and 10% of your costs. But they will creep back eventually. Because what will happen is, and in this example, you will use petty cash to buy those biscuits. And you'll bring them back into those meetings. Or you'll find mechanisms to charge them in. And yes, you can try that for a period of time. You probably can do it less. So, you buy a couple of less packets, or you'll eat 1 biscuit in every meeting, whatever the case may be. But again, the savings will go between 15 and 20% based on our research. You may decide to do better. So you won't buy biscuits, you'll buy rusks, because they'll be harder to chew. So you'll save some money again. But fundamentally, what we're saying is those are not the kind of initiatives you need to focus on. If you truly want to get to cost reduction, beyond and above 20% of your savings, you've got to do something totally different. You've got to do something totally different. So let me give you an example. I helped a large, probably one of the top 4 international brands in the world that are based here, and for confidentiality reasons, I can't disclose them. But we helped this particular entity. They're in what's referred to as the QSR industry, quick service restaurants. You probably can start figuring them out now. So we helped them basically drive costs out of the organization. I'm giving you this as an example because it was very successful, and you may reflect on this again from your perspective. So they were spending a lot of money in oil. They used oil as a key component of their manufacture. We went back and we analyzed it, and there were ways that they could reduce the oil consumption. Whether it's managing the equipment that they were using, it was managing waste. But then we said, let's just do some research on it. And we did a whole lot of international research. And we came up with an additive that you can put into oil. So if you understand in the cooking industry, you use oil for a period of time. There's a certain useful life for it. And beyond that useful life, you've got to discard it or it affects the quality and taste of your food. This particular additive that was introduced increased the useful life of the oil. What it did was they were getting, let's take for example 4 weeks. By introducing the additive, they started getting 8 to 16 weeks out of it. So what happened was they spent more at the beginning. You agree? But if you look at the total cost over a period of time, they were spending less. So the concept of doing something completely different is what's going to sit as a responsibility for you to reflect on. The age-old saving mechanisms are not going to work given our economic climate. We've got to do something different. And these are the trends that we're finding. So what I want to share with you is 3 concepts. I've shown you 3 concepts here. When we looked at personnel cost, we looked at expenditure, direct, indirect, and building. So I want to share 3 of those examples with you quickly. If you take people, so again, we helped an organization, and the one thing they said to us was, you cannot touch headcount. In other words, you can't reduce people. That would be the easiest thing, right? Let's cut our people out. That's generally the easiest way to reduce costs. But there are other ways of doing it. And I mean, quite interestingly, again, I just reflect on the global crime survey that we ran. 42% of respondents found that they had some type of fraud in HR, some type of fraud. Okay? But how do you then reflect on that and say, how do we save costs? And it's not about cutting people. It's about making sure you have the right people in the right positions, you're supporting them, you ensure that their skills are at the right level, whether it means the right skills assessments, making sure that you have the right person for the job. You don't have a structure that's bloated. You have an efficient structure. People are multi-skilled, and these are the type of things that we focused on, so that you can use them in more than one area. So you make your people more efficient. And of course, you've got to overlay that with a performance management system. You've got to make sure they're accountable. But I can't be accountable if I don't understand my KPIs, right? And very importantly, they can't be input KPIs. In other words, you know, I need to receive 20 orders. That's not a KPI. But I need to process 15 successful orders is outcome-based. And that's effectively what we're finding. And that's what we did. Headcount. I mean, this is something, and this links to the crime survey. We have done a lot of projects on helping large organizations, private and public sector, look at their people. And I can almost guarantee you in all of the instances, I found either fictitious individuals, whether it's deliberate or intentional or unintentional. I found the payroll had incorrect rates. I found errors in the payroll and those type of things. I mean, I can share this with you. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Daily News had an article, KZN Department of Health looked at about, I think, 22 odd institutions. Maybe somebody read the article in the audience. I can't remember the details. But they looked at 22 institutions and they found 1,500 potential people that they didn't exist. That's just 15. Go back and reflect on how many institutions they have. Go back and reflect on how many people you hire. Look at your costs. Your biggest component of your expenditure is on personnel costs. There must be opportunities there. And then, of course, there's looking at staff expenses from traveling, transportation, accommodation, etc. And it's making sure that it's effective, it's efficient, and it complies with your policy. So those are the kind of things we looked at. And maybe you want to think on that. Property. So we helped an organization look at their property costs. Again, it's about making sure that you're paying market-related rentals. But beyond that, do you have too much space? Do you have too little space? There was a large mining company that we were involved with. And again, this was a private sector client, shockingly enough. And they were spending, their rate per square meter was probably low. But they had so much of excess space that they were not using. If you took the utilized space and you worked out the rate per square meter, they were off the charts. One of the initiatives was to start rationalizing their space. So these are the type of things that we look at from property. So they're different. It's not about getting rid of it completely. And then, of course, third-party spend. You know, these are the biggest contributors we find. Lack of contract compliance. It's not about having a contract, but ensuring compliance. Are penalty clauses being implemented? I think lack of skills and capacity, that I've already discussed. Lack of structured procurement planning. That's one of the fundamental pillars of any procurement. If you want to procure, you go out and buy. If you want to get into supply chain management and strategic sourcing and leverage your volumes and economies of scale, you've got to plan your procurement better. And that's becoming key. Lack of market analysis. It's easy to say this, but let me give you an example. You guys all know the example where a buyer bought bread, one of our provinces, I can't remember now, and they paid 35 Rand for a loaf of bread. That you can relate to, right? And you can relate to that quite easily. But let me give you another example. If your buyers are expected to buy chemicals and they don't understand the cost of a chemical, they could be paying exorbitant prices. I was involved in one particular initiative where buyers were required to buy bridges. You know the pedestrian bridges over roads and highways? That's not straightforward. They paid about 3 times the price. And all we did was we went in and we analyzed what was available in the market. And we found that it could be bought at 1/3 the price. Look, for a second, I'm saying this is not deliberate. I'm forgetting fraud and irregularities. Just look at market analysis and making sure. It doesn't matter whether you have the budget to spend it. Are you going to get value for money? That's what's going to become really incompetent. And then, of course, your tools. You can have the best, and I'm the one that always says, get your manual processes right. But if you want to enable them, get the right systems in place. And without the right systems, everything becomes reactive and not proactive. So that's a key aspect you want to focus on. Okay, just quickly on third-party spend. I know I'm running out of time as well. Just third-party spend. I think what we're finding is that you've got to take a strategic approach to third-party spend. And it needs to be more collaborative with your suppliers. A lot more engagement. I'm not saying we need to circumvent the process itself, but it needs to be more strategic. So the first thing that organizations do when it comes to cost reduction is looking at focusing on the concept of sourcing. In other words, where are we sourcing it from? Can we get it cheaper, etc.? Have you looked at the demand side of it carefully enough? In other words, in organizations have a need and a want. Let me give you an example. You have a need to write, right? You agree? You have to write. You need a pen. You need to write. You need to write with black ink. How do you write with black ink? You can write with a big pen, or you can write with a Mont Blanc pen. But your fundamental need is to write. If it's not carefully analyzed, you'll buy a Mont Blanc pen. Okay, that's an extreme example. But you understand what I'm saying. You buy a pen that's very expensive that you probably don't need. So instead of focusing on the sourcing side of things, you focus on the demand. And that gives you a lot of benefit. I've spoken about contract management, and I think I've spoken about SCM compliance. The compliance of policy processes will go a long way to help you. There are a couple more examples in terms of getting the right capable suppliers in place and making sure you pay invoices on time. How many of you take advantage of volume discounts or settlement discounts? Pay on time and get that 2% or 3% negotiated. There's nothing wrong with that. Just a couple of key issues that we're finding in the industry. So supply chain management needs a framework. It needs a framework to ensure that it operates within. So you, of course, don't have to comply with the PFMA. I understand that. But it's incumbent upon you to have a robust framework in place. And just in my personal opinion, I've looked at supply chain management frameworks across the globe. And I find that the PFMA offers probably one of the best frameworks I've seen, really. There's nothing wrong with it. The only flaw is implementation. We don't implement it, and we don't have the capabilities to implement it. It's not the framework. It's really, really a good framework. I mean, as an experiment, I took the principles, I understand the principles, I took it to a private sector client. And they said to me, wow, this is exactly what we need to adopt. And they have adopted it. Obviously, it's customized to their own requirements. But that was the experiment I ran in this country, by the way. So it's interesting. I think there's nothing wrong with the framework. And SCM is becoming so important that it affects every aspect of any organization, especially yours, your value chain. From getting a student in to skilling them up to making sure they get placed. That's the entire value chain of your organization. But what's happening is internationally, companies are finding that SCM is such a strategic asset that they're getting SCM to report directly into the board. And I think that's something you need to reflect on. Supply chain management is becoming a strategic asset. And until such time that we don't recognize that, it'll continue to be a procurement function. Some of the common challenges, policies and procedures, and these are things that we've worked on. We actually work on quite a few higher educational institutes. And what we found is that there are many policies and procedures in place, but at different levels of maturity, no standardization. Some of them have been through council for approval, some of them haven't. But importantly, if you want to hold people accountable to a process, you've got to equip them. And you can't equip them if they don't understand what they need to do. That's the importance. Supplier database, you can read a couple of points in there. But supplier database itself, from lacking the quality of the supplier database, not having the right information, not being vetted, document management, not having contracts in place or SLAs so that you can go and look at them and see whether you're applying penalties. Contract management, huge issue. Making sure that not only do we implement or sign a contract, but are we managing it? And finally, performance management. Absolutely key performance management if you look at it. Not performance management of individuals, two key individuals. Your buyers, are you managing them? And your suppliers. How often do you buy from the same supplier that supplied you the same food in extremely poor quality and you buy from them again? Okay, PwC has a higher education conference that we hold in August. I had the privilege of being there this year, and I ran a session, a breakaway session. Some of you may have been there. And what we did is we asked participants, what are the key challenges you face? And I want to just share this with you. I found it very interesting. Not from us, from your sector, what are the key challenges? And this is what they voted on. Procurement planning, biggest challenge. Policy process, delegation of authorities, data analysis. In other words, they don't analyze their procurement. Are orders being split? What is the volume of emergency orders in place? Are there opportunities to put contracts in place for commonly procured items like PERCO? Can we extend that beyond, one university? Can we, a couple of products? Can we extend it beyond that? No, we can't. Supplier performance, emergency orders. You look at project management of committees, the time it takes to actually process a tender. How long does it take? And where is that falling short? And a couple of other categories that you can read there, centralized procurement. And I'm happy to share any of this if you want. So those are the common issues that we found. And I guess it's interesting because it's from you. Okay. I'd like to conclude with that. I know I'm probably 1 minute over. But if there's time, I'm actually happy to take any questions that you have.
We do have our roving mics, don't we? Yes, we do. Comments, questions, observations? If I don't see, it's because these two lights are shining into my eyes. And I should be wearing shades, and I can look cool. I'd like to see, we have one hand here in front. Could we get a mic here in front to Dr. Chetty? Is there another hand? And we've got another hand there, that beautiful lady there. You are a lady, are you not? You're too nice to be a guy. Thank you. Dr. Chetty, please.
Thank you. Thank you for a very informative presentation. There was a saying in one of the slides by Boateng. Can you just go back and explain what you think that means?
Yeah, so SCM has a direct link to long-term quality, service delivery, human capital development, and associated socio-economic growth. If you reflect on that statement, it's...
Sorry, not so much there.
Yeah.
I suspect I'm reflecting a little bit about that. Sorry. I'm focusing on I suspect, which is the title of his book or his paper. You know, what is he referring to when government service delivery lies in SAM, not in centralized procurement?
Yeah, so the concept that I understand from him is it's moving procurement into strategic elements of your organization, to supply chain management. You can centralize procurement. Government can centralize procurement. The function can be centralized, but is it strategic in nature? Is it taking into consideration strategic sourcing? Are we understanding our needs versus our wants? And a lot of that comes from that concept. And I think if we get it right, we contribute at all levels. So I think that's probably the kind of thing that he's referring to. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
We have another question. If you can just please say who you are and where you're from, so that we can place you somewhere. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dawn. I'm from Drakenskull Facilities Management. And I just wanted to know what has been done to combat the vendor selection fraud that's taking place.
Sorry, could you repeat that? What was the?
What is being done to combat the vendor selection fraud that we're experiencing in our country, which is obviously the biggest component of fraud?
Yeah, so I can share with you what some of the initiatives are. And there's a lot of these initiatives in place. It's a case of adopting them and implementing them. There's a lot of focus being placed currently on the independence of suppliers and the cross relationships. That's the first element. So the concept of making sure that when a supplier comes in, are we vetting the owners of that supplier? Is there any relationship with the state for those individuals? And the concept of relationship of state, what I've seen, needs to extend beyond that particular institute. It needs to extend beyond. And then it's about declaration of interest, that we need to ensure that especially people in buying, there's a strong focus on that. But that records must be adequately kept. That's the one side of it. And then the other side is about supplier performance. What we're finding is that our level of maturity in terms of assessing our suppliers post-delivery is very poor. You know, do we spend the time rating our suppliers? And if we do, is that available in some form so that we can look at it and reflect on it when we procure from those suppliers again? There's a very specific process to blacklist suppliers, and I'm not talking about that. But do we understand the level of quality that they're delivering? I can almost tell you in most of the institutes I've worked at, whether it's higher education departments across the span, you know, they probably buy from a supplier that's let them down 2 or 3 times, and they buy again. And I mean, that's something that needs to be looked at very carefully. So those are the type of initiatives in place. Okay.
Is there any other question, observation, or comment? Because there's a lot of experience sitting here in the floor today. I would like to also to gain from some of your insights. Give as much as you take. Any comments? Okay, then would you join me one last time to give Mr. Jhavary a round of applause?